Good morning, everybody. This is Pat Hale with 24/3 Management, and I just wanted to share with you this morning something that is absolutely transforming. We've had the opportunity here at 24/3 Management over the last couple of years to develop and work through and mentor and coach pastors, church leaders, elder boards, congregations, and many couples in the area of budget and debt elimination coaching. It has been transforming. We've watched people begin to tithe. We've watched people begin to pay off their debt. And really, when you consider the internet today, really, do we need any more information? There's plenty of information out there. We've got some leaders out there, Financial Peace University, Crown Financial Ministries. There are so many out there. What is one more company that talks about biblical stewardship? Really, do we need that? Well, what makes 24/3 Management different is the fact that we believe one-on-one coaching is what makes the difference. When you consider what Christ did, he discipled his 12, and here we are 2,000 plus years later, and their training, their discipleship has absolutely waved into our life and helped us to not be conformed to the world, but be transformed, mainly because Jesus discipled the 12 discipled from there, and it's just gone down through the centuries, and here we are today. Today is session 17 of phase 2, which is mentoring the mentors, or as a friend of my coach says, training the trainers, or preparing disciplers to disciple God's people. That's what phase 2 is all about, is putting together the nuts and the bolts of stewardship, discipleship that will help God's people. All of us have a need, whether we're a pastor or an elder, a church leader, a member of a church, a teenager, all the way to senior adult. And I really believe that one of the big mistakes we're making in the church today is we're not discipling our babies. We're not taking stewardship down into the elementary and preschool ages. They need to be memorizing Scripture. They need to be worshiping. They need to be growing into what it means to be Christian and all of that good stuff. The reality, though, when it comes to stewardship, is they really need to learn. And again, for those of you that may be listening to the first time, we believe at 24/3 Management that stewardship is time, talent, treasure, temple talk, toys, and technology. And so just want to encourage everybody as you're considering this, that you can see that God is large and in charge. He is still on his throne. He's been God for a long, long time. He really understands when he tells us in Matthew 28, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them all that I have commanded you. Again, he's really focusing in. Ephesians 4, 11 through 12 talks about that God gave some as apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers for the equipping of the saints. And by the way, one of the words for equipping is mending. It's kind of like mending our nets. You go look at that passage in the gospel about James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They were with their father in their boat mending their nets because they had spent the past evening fishing. And whenever you use any kind of equipment, they break down. You got to do this, you got to do that. Well, would imagine that as you're fishing, your nets get caught on rocks, or things happen, or they just wear out. They're in the water all day, and then they're in the sun the rest of the day, the rest of the time. And so, all that. So those nets have to be mended. And I really believe that from now until the Lord's return, that there's a lot of net mending that needs to take place. And that's what I believe that 24/3 is all about. By the way, our name, 24/3 Management, is based on Proverbs 24:3. By wisdom is a house built, through understanding and knowledge, and filled with all rare and eternal treasures. So just want to continue this thought process. So today in session 17, we're going to be talking about the budget and the debt coaching elimination process and the importance of that as we move forward. Excuse me. I was prepared for today, except I had one file that wasn't in front of me. So I apologize. So that ought to prove right there that I'm not perfect. But I do want to talk with you, though, about the debt and elimination process. But I want to begin with some facts. I've been collecting these facts now about the area of stewardship for quite some time, because as I began my study, as I began to talk with others, I've spent the last 12 years of my adult life working in the financial industry. I worked for timothyplan.com or .org. They are one of the largest Christian mutual funds in the nation. And so I was their national trainer. And I've spent the last 10 years working in a Christian investment firm, where what made them different than some of the others out there is that they're biblically responsible, which means if you invest with them, they make sure that their portfolio and your resources are not being used for an immoral agenda. So they would screen out abortion, pornography, same-sex marriage, alcohol, tobacco, things of that nature, and that would not be in your portfolio. So, but as I've worked with in this industry now for 12 years, there's a few things that I've learned here about stuff. First of all, a new number: 1 in 6 millennials have $100,000 saved right now as a millennial. The stat didn't say how they have that, but again, there's a savings process that you go through, and you'll hear more about savings here in a minute. Randy Alcorn says materialism began in a garden where the first man and woman chose to follow their appetites rather than the command of God, seeking fulfillment on the one thing God forbade them. And so they went right to the tree, which was good to the eyes, and it was attractive, and it looked good for food, and they did something that God told them not to do. Materialism has become a modern-day idol in our life. The average American spends $1.26 for every dollar earned, and 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That's by Aaron Roach in the Baptist Press. And you think about it, if every American spends $1.26 for every dollar they make, if you make $50,000 a year at $1.26, if you're spending at 26 cents more for every dollar you earn, you just put $12,000 on some kind of a credit, you've either pulled it from your savings or you've been putting it on your credit cards or whatever. So that means you spent roughly, it's actually $12,000 plus. You spent $12,000 more than you earned. And if you have two wage earners, the same stat applies. So just something to be thinking about as we move forward. According to the 2015 Empty Tomb Incorporated report, less than 3% of all Christians tithe. The median annual gift to a church is $200. And Americans give 2.2% from their disposable income, which is less than what they gave during the Great Depression. 62% of people who retire today retire with less than $10,000. 25% of Americans are making at least $100,000 annually and live paycheck to paycheck. Over 53% of Americans could not pay for an emergency that costs more than $400. Average consumer debt is $38,000 per person, wage earners in the home, and that does not include your mortgage. It has been said that 25 to 50% of people who attend church every Sunday give zero, and 3% of those who attend every Sunday tithe. 25% of people in your churches or that you know have experienced layoffs and relocation. 1 in 3 households average $40,000 in college debt. They say Christian Stewardship Network says that 15% of your church are stuck, 50% of your church is struggling, 25% of your church is stable, and 10% of your church has surplus. So that means 65% of your congregation are either stuck or struggling. And most churches, I've been told, a number that was thrown at me here in Texas is that over 90% of evangelical churches are doing no stewardship training except for maybe a once-a-year stewardship sermon series, and that's it. You know, it's amazing when people go out and get in debt. They buy a house, they buy a car, they lease a car. Come on, y'all. Or they go lease tires and rims. Why would you lease something? Because you're just pouring money down the drain. But that's what's happening in our culture. And yet, how many of those decisions were made after coming in and sitting down and talking with their pastor or a leader in their church? And I've asked that survey many, many times. And I'm typically told I would never go to my church or my pastor for that kind of a decision. That's not to be critical. It just says in our culture, they don't think we understand that. And they may be right. So just something to be thinking about as we move forward. And there's other facts. But again, the reality of what's taking place in our world, in our nation, is that Pope John Paul II said, as goes the family, so goes the community. As goes the family, so goes the nation, and so goes the world that we live in. One of the things that the enemy is doing is he's literally forcing us into this mold of spending more than we make, not savings, not putting money aside for retirement, literally spending every dollar we make. But many of us have mortgages, or we have high credit cards, or we'll have 2 or 3 car payments. In other words, we're spending every dime just to survive from one month to the next. So the reality is, guys, that's not the Father's plan. So let me just encourage you to be thinking about that as we go through this process. Okay. What I'd like to share with you is the 24/3 budget and debt elimination process. You can find these forms, and there's several of them. You can find these forms on our website, which is 243management.com. Spell out 24, number 3, management.com. Go to 243management.com. You will see our website. And on our website, there's a general menu over on the right. If you're looking at it on a computer, if you're looking at it on your phone in an app, it'll be to your left. But you'll see the 3 little bars. Click on that, and that will allow you to see a menu. And you'll see their you'll see their budget and debt elimination forms. That's what those are. And the first form, what's so important with budget and debt elimination coaching is helping people put together their financial life that addresses their passion, their vision, and their values, okay? And so the first thing we talk about, if you will, what are the 5 top priorities of your life? Would it be God? Would it be spouse? Would it be children? Would it be retirement? Would it be tithing? Would it be serving in my church? What are the top 5 priorities? You know, some have said, well, God first, spouse second, family third, then comes my job, and then comes my ministry. I've heard that's one of the things that I've utilized over the years. For me personally, it has been a huge benefit because it helps me to keep my priorities as far as the priority of my life. After you know your priorities, then you set some goals to meet those priorities. If God is your number 1 priority, how are you going to make him the number 1 priority? Remember, God is still on his throne. But if we're not careful, we can kick him off the throne and put something else on there. You go all the way back to the 10 Commandments. You go all the way back to the garden. That was one of the things that Adam and Eve did, is God was on his throne, and they did something that he told them not to do. Actually, he told Adam, not Eve. But they basically told God, we don't care what your counsel is, we're going to go eat of the tree. You get to the 10 Commandments, and the very first commandment is don't put any other gods before me. Don't make any gods is the second one. I mean, the first 2 are really about don't put an idol on my throne, and don't make idols on your throne. Don't make them up. And what's happened in our world today, we're in one of the richest times in our nation. Our nation is right now in a robust season, a lot of things happening, but we're more, instead of it being a national economy, we're a world economy. And most people don't realize the big difference there. But when you're in a world economy, what we do in America affects China and Japan and Russia and all across Africa, all across the world. It's a global economy. But when we're getting back to the priorities of God, if He's your first priority, then what are you going to do? Second priority, if your second priority is your wife, then make a goal. What are you going to establish as a goal to make your wife the number 2 priority? And then maybe your third priority is your children. Goal number 3. Again, you're working off of 2 different forms. You've got priorities and then you've got goals. So your priorities establish your goals, and your goals should answer your priorities. They should move you to accomplish those priorities. So just keep that in mind as you're working through these forms. I find it interesting. A lot of folks have never done this exercise. When I've done personal debt coaching and helping families, whether it be a single or it be a husband and wife, most often they don't have those. The third form is looks like this. It's a chart, and what I'm asking you to do is do a cash flow record chart. I'm asking you for 30 days in the process of coaching you. I ask that you begin to write down every time you spend money. So let's say today is the 29th of the month. And so on the 29th of the month, if you paid the mortgage payment, then on the day of the 29th, you write in a mortgage. You'll notice that at the very top of this form, it says housing. And then there's 1 through 31 dates at the very top, 1 through 31. You get over here to 29, and I know it's a little awkward. I really encourage you to go to 243management.com. And you'll notice as you go down the date of the 29th, there's these little blocks. And they coordinate with housing and food and clothing. So on the 29th, let's just say whatever month you're in, you paid the mortgage. And so you write that in on the 29th, and you bought Chick-fil-A. Well, you write that in. Or you guys went and got groceries. You write that in. What you're doing is you're keeping track of how you spend your money. Now, it's interesting. Been doing this long enough now that when we get down to the area of entertainment and recreation and miscellaneous, now that's typically, when I say food in this budget, I'm talking about the food that the household eats, that you cook, you have for breakfast, you have your lunch, you have for dinner. It's what you have in your pantry, your refrigerator, and your freezer, that kind of food. The other kind of food is where you buy and you eat out. So McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, the Taco Bell, the list goes on. So every time you spend money, you go buy a bottle of water, you buy a Coke, you buy a candy bar, whatever. You write all of that down, because what we're trying to do is see spending habits. And typically where I see the most waste, it's in eating out. We live in a very transportation society. There's a lot going on in a home. You could have mom and dad both work, and they have softball, and they have gymnastics, and they have piano lessons, and they have swim lessons, and then they have cross country on the weekends, and it's that way. And so that's a big something to be thinking about. So keep that in mind. Keep track for 30 days. Then what I have you do, the next form, is estimate your monthly living expenses. In the columns that I asked you to write down your expenses on your last form, we now have an estimated monthly living expense form where housing is not just a block, but it's housing. Mortgage and rent, insurance, property, electricity, heating, water, garbage collection, telephone, cleaning and repair, and improvements and furnishings and supply for homes and others. That's all included under furnishing. What I encourage you to do is basically write down what it costs you to run your home. It's going to include your car payments, your debt, your whatever, however you spend your money. That's how what you're going to do on this list. And it's a 3-pager. We talk about housing, we talk about food, how about clothing, transportation, we talk about entertainment, recreation, dining out, child care, newspaper, cable, magazines, vacation, club dues, fees, etc. How about medical expenses? medical health insurance, doctors, dentists, medicine, orthodontist, others. What about insurance? Life, disability, others, and what about car? You can put car insurance on there. How about children? School lunches, allowance, school tuition, lessons, special fees, dues. And the list just goes on and on and on. But again, it's not a long list. It's just anybody that's worked with a budget. And by the way, in doing budget and debt elimination coaching, without an exception, most of the people that I'm coaching with budget debt elimination, they do not have a budget. And 9 times out of 10, they don't tithe. They may give an offering, but they don't tithe. And every one of them would say, well, we can't afford to tithe. And I'm just here to tell you, from a biblical perspective, you can't afford not to tithe. You are hurting your family, because you're violating a principle that we read about in the Old Testament. And by the way, tithing not only goes from the Old Testament, but it also goes in the New Testament. The Lord talked about it. The Apostle Paul talks about going beyond the tithe to generosity. So just keep some thoughts in mind as we're moving for this. Now, once you put all those monthly expenses together, now we create a monthly cash flow analysis. And basically, the top of the list is what is your gross income? And then the next line is what is your giving, meaning your tithe, or if you just give an amount, you put that in there. And then taxes, which is from you can get that from your payroll, because your gross is what you make, and then your net is what you have left over. Tithe on the gross, you pay taxes on the gross, and then whatever's left over, that is your net spendable income. That's what you have left to operate the home. Now, the past chart that I had you do, which is your expense, you're estimating the expense of your home, you now put all of your totals of each of those categories, you put them on this form, because our goal is to go down from A to J. That's how many categories there are. And we're going to figure out, when you add A through J together, what your monthly living expense is. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your net spendable income. By the way, this is all on this form. You take your net spendable income minus your living expenses, and that allows you to know what your cash flow margin is. Let me just say to you, most of the people, when I do debt and budget coaching, there is no cash flow. So I basically have to help them go back through their spending process and their budget and the expenses of their home, and we start going through each line item. Now, do you have to be a financial planner to do this? No, because I'm not one. Do you have to be an accountant? No, because I'm not one. What am I? I'm a pastor. My role as a pastor is to equip the saints for the work of the service. I see this as a huge cultural disconnect. The church is not teaching it. Pastors don't understand it. Leaders don't do it. And I'm just here to tell you, if they're not getting it from the pulpit, they're not going to understand it in the pew. If we're not modeling it, if we're not moving forward, and that doesn't mean we talk about prosperity and all this kind of stuff. No, we're just helping people balance their budget. As Dave Ramsey says, live your wage. And so bottom line, what we're looking for with a cash flow margin is how much to put in savings, how much to put in retirement, what about extra debt payment, what about additional giving, so that you have at the bottom what is uncommitted cash flow margin. I promise you, the people I've been coaching, there is no uncommitted monthly cash flow. By the time we get that far down on a budget, there's nothing left. So something has to change. Again, remember that statistic I shared earlier, that most Americans spend $1.26 for every dollar they make. So this is an example of, you go through this process and it will help you see where your money is. I'm here to tell you, we've helped people that, we helped a young lady that only made about $10,000 a year. She was probably the best money manager out of the bunch, because she was really trying to live within that $10,000. And I've been able to help coach people on up to $500,000 that are doctors and accountants, and not accountants, I'm sorry, doctors and pharmacists and others, and contractors and medical sales and all these different folks. And many of them are six-figure income, and yet they come with incredible large amounts of debt. I'm here to tell you that's one of the big issues that we're seeing in the church. The last document that we talk about is a debt repayment schedule. What I have you list is it's 1 through 15. Hopefully you don't have that many debts. Most people that I coach have anywhere between 3 to 6 or 7, maybe 8 debts. And by the way, that doesn't include your mortgage. I always include it on this page, but we don't use that as a part of the conversation. I use that personally. I believe having a mortgage is a debt. So I put it in my whole debt, not in, but again, right now what we're looking at is that consumer debt. So things like car payments, tuition payments, credit cards, lines of credit, things of that nature. And you write the name of the lender, what your balance is, what your monthly payment is, what is your interest amount, what are your remaining payments, and then based on remaining payments, you divide that by 12, and that gives you an idea of what month and what year you'll be able to pay this debt off if all you do is make the monthly payment. What I try to do is help you take some of your income and convert it to cash so that we can then move it over to debt elimination and you can begin to eliminate. Remember, once you're in debt, it takes you a long time to get out of debt. It's interesting in Deuteronomy 28, most people don't know this, the Lord said that debt is a curse. He told Israel, you can loan, but do not borrow. Because what happens is that we become the tail when we borrow from the lender, and he's wagging us. I mean, so he's pushing us forward and all this. So I just really want to encourage you, if you're a pastor, elder, church leader, whatever, this is a humongous need in the church. I'm telling you, plug and play stewardship training is not meeting the need. Maybe in that top 10 or 15% in the church that are stable and they have surplus and they've gone through the stuck and struggling and survived. The problem with stuck and struggling is a lot of them do not survive. And those of us that are stable and surplus, we don't think we need any help, and we really can't help them, so that's their problem. We can't do that in the church. So keep in mind that when it comes to equipping the saints for the work of the service, we need to be doing what we can to mend nets. Again, at 243management.com. Remember, spell out 24, number 3, management.com. At 243management.com, there's all of these forms are on there. This video that you're watching right now, it's a part of, this is number 17, and there's a whole nother phase before this. This phase, which is phase 2, has 17 videos. And then next week, we're moving to phase 3, where we're talking about a stewardship campaign. And again, so just keep in mind that this video is really about how to fix your financial issue and live your wage and pay off your debt. And I wanted to close today by giving you, forgive me for looking at my phone, but I wanted to give to you a friend of mine. Several years ago, we were chatting about, what is basic financial planning. And he works with pastors all over the United States. He's in Southern California, and he works through helping pastors with their family finances. Basically, what he does is he does pastors' taxes for free. And if you want to know who that is, just go Google Jim Rickard, Rickard, Jim Rickard, and you'll find his group, and you can contact them. And Pastor, he'll do your taxes for free, but he will also encourage you to give a donation to his organization, which is fair. And you don't work for free, and neither does he. But pastors' taxes, because we're in the nonprofit world, and the IRS sees us as not only contract labor, but they also see us as an employee. We pay self-employment tax, but we get housing allowance. There's all kinds of benefits for being a pastor. We just have to manage them well, or they will manage us. But when it comes to financial or family financial priorities, the first thing is give to the Lord's work, at least a 10% minimum. You realize today that there's a whole bunch of Christians on the earth. If every Christian tithed, we would have billions of dollars left over to fund ministry. But that's not the case. Most churches have 3% of their attenders that are tithing, and 25 to 50% of the rest of those that attend their church give nothing. So we have to keep in mind, this is a big issue in the church today. And I always recommend, if you're watching this video, I always recommend this book, The Great Evangelical Recession by John Dickerson. John Dickerson is a renowned research journalist. He's a pastor in Prescott, Arizona, and he put this book together because he began to see a trend in the giving of churches, and it started in the mega churches. He began to see that mega churches that had hundreds or thousands of people coming, all of a sudden were struggling to pay their bills. Why? And he's been able to isolate the fact that the older generation, I'm a late baby boomer, the generation before the boomers. They're incredible givers. Many of them are still alive, but they're dying. And as they die off, nobody is replacing them as contributors to the kingdom of God. So what's happened is you've got baby boomers, which there's a percentage of them that give and a percentage that don't. And then you have the generations to follow right down to the millennials and whatever the generation is after them, that giving is not a part of their process. Part of it is because it's not in our pulpits, it's not in our doctrinal studies, it's not in our ministry DNA. It's not a part of what we do, and that's a cultural thing. We got to get back, not because of the money, but because of the fact stewardship is not just treasure. It's time, talent, treasure, temple, talk, toys, and technology. But here's what he says. So give to the Lord's work. Number 2, take care of the needs of your family. Create a budget. Sound familiar? Become debt-free. Sound familiar? Cash reserves. I'll bet that sounds familiar. We always recommend 1 month of expenses, as you're moving forward. I know others out there say, get $1,000 in the bank and then pay off your debt. Well, what I always recommend is you do 50-50. When you get to the end of the month, you've paid all of your bills, and you have $50 left over, or $100 left over, or $300 left over, or $1,000 left over. What I encourage you to do is take that $1,000, put half of it, take that, I'm sorry, let me say it right, 50-50. Take it and put half of it on your debt, because debt is typically more of an amount than personal savings. So put half of what you're left, that's at the end of the month, put half on your debt, which lowers your debt, and put half on your cash, which raises your cash. And what happens, you do that each month. What takes place is eventually your cash surpasses your debt. And as you continue to pay off your debt, eventually you have enough cash to pay this debt and wipe it out. You will still have cash, not as much, but now you're debt-free. That's where I believe the 50-50 comes in. So let me encourage you. You start with, make as your first goal 1 month of expenses. So whatever it costs you to run your house, and if you're going through these worksheets, you already know that, that's the amount you want to have in your savings, and that's for expenses. That's not for vacation or a new car. That's expenses for to take care of your home and keep your family in shelter. And then as you begin to pay off your debt, then 3 months income and then 6 months income. We also recommend buy a modest house, drive a modest car, and establish an investment plan. If you're debt-free, and you have 6 months in the bank of expenses, you now are in a good spot to go buy a house, not to mention begin to establish your investments. So the third area is protect your family from a catastrophic occurrence. Purchase disability insurance, life insurance, and if you're a renter, make sure you have rent insurance. So disability insurance, life insurance, rental insurance, those things. Fourth, provide for your future. Retirement and estate planning and legacy giving. Let me encourage you. Let me ask you this question. How biblical is retirement? Typically, when I ask that question, people tell me there's nowhere in the Bible where it talks about retirement. Well, in Numbers, the 8th chapter, we have a couple verses there where the priests could retire at 50, and then they could stay on and help the new priests voluntarily. They could help on the new priests move forward in the ministry that God has given them. So retirement is mentioned in the Bible, but it was mentioned for priests. And don't go and say, well, I'm a part of the priesthood of the believers, so that fits me. Well, okay. Again, the reality is making sure, and let me just say this, go back to the 10 Commandments. Have no gods before me. If we're not tithing, but we're saving for retirement, we have a God in our life. When we don't put God first in our finances, we have a God in our life, and it's called retirement. God is not saying, he says in his word, a man that doesn't provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever. 1 Timothy 5:8. God also says you're supposed to provide an inheritance to your children's children. Absolutely. But do not forsake giving to God to save for yourself. Because you can go read Luke 12 about the man who had everything and his crops were growing. And he said, look what I have done. And he said, I'm going to build bigger barns. So basically he was saying, I'm going to hoard more. And God required his life that day. So keep in mind, greed and those things are not good. So provide for the future of your family. And by the way, if you prepare for your family for the future, I believe our greatest legacy is our faith. Some of us are not going to have a whole lot of financial resources. I watched my grandma and know her story enough. She struggled her whole adult life. But when my grandma died, she was debt-free, and she had a little bit of money, and she did it all on cutting hair in her own beauty shop in her renovated garage, which was her beauty shop. And that's what she did for most of my life until she passed away 27 years ago, actually. So just keep all of that in mind, that it's not how much you make, but what you do with what you make. And then finally, spend less than you earn, avoid debt, set goals, give generously, and save for the future. Well, that's a lot that's been said in this time, and I really want to encourage you, if you really want to help the people sitting in the pew and your staff and your elders and your pastor, you really want to be, and by the way, if you're a pastor, please hear this. My goal is to help you become the hero. I would love to coach you. I would love to help you, show you how to do all 4 phases from strategic planning to mentor the mentors to a stewardship campaign, all the way over to small groups where stuck, struggling, stable, and surplus God's people in your church can have individual discipleship and help them become better stewards. Well, until next time, this is Pat Hale with 24/3 Management. You can find us on our website at 243management.com, spell out 24, number 3, management.com. You can also go to 243management@gmail.com, spell out 24, number 3, management@gmail.com, and you can send us an email. But I'd love for you to go to the website, look at these videos. There are some free videos there for you to look at. You can look at the forms and other things. I would love to answer any questions. My goal is not to do anything other than to help you, pastor, you, Christian, to mend your nets, and you help others mend their nets. Imagine a whole generation of stewards teaching others how to mend their nets. Well, until next week, remember, every Thursday morning at 9 a.m., we have a coaching call here at 24/3 Management. I'd love to invite you to come be a part of it. Go to our website. There you can sign up for this course, and would love to go through the coaching process with you. God bless. Talk to you soon.